Good morning to everybody. My name is Sourabh Gupta from the Institute for China-America Studies, and I will be moderating the second panel, which will be on trade and tech issues in US-China relations. Obviously, it's a great timing. We got lucky that the two presidents met last night, and so many of the topics that we will be discussing today have been topics which have kind of consumed US-China relations for the past 8 months. Particularly, trade agreements, having a comprehensive trade agreement, a pathway to a trade agreement. Where do export controls fit in that? Can you have export controls happening against either both sides imposing controls and at the same time get to a pathway to a trade agreement? So, the two countries have had multiple rounds of meetings. What was it, in Geneva, London, Stockholm, Madrid, Kuala Lumpur. So this is an area which we know has had quite a lot of activity in the last few months. And therefore, one of my requests to my panelists would be to kind of, when they talk in their respective topics out here, to also kind of factor in what happened yesterday in Busan, last night in Busan, and how does that kind of shape the dynamics of US-China trade ties going forward. I am not going to hang around out here much. I think there's a lot to discuss. Let me very, very briefly just introduce our speakers. First, we will have Dr. ZHOU speaking. He is the Deputy Director of the Institute of American and Oceanic Studies at the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. He will, I assume, speak mostly on the trade element, and there's a lot to discuss, obviously, out there. But we are not going to just stick to just the trade dynamic. We're going to talk from a broader perspective in terms of US-China economic ties, in terms of competition in the AI space, AI chips, et cetera, et cetera. We will have Paul TRIOLO, who unfortunately couldn't be out here, but he is going to speak from Beijing. He will be via video feed, and he is going to speak next. He is a partner at DGA Albright Stonebridge Group. Third, we will come to Mr. KOIZUMI, who has been in the Obama and Biden Office of Science and Technology Policy and was Special Assistant to the President with regard to science, society, and policy. And then we will round up the panel with Dr. Denis Simon. He's been a mainstay at many of our events. He has been ex-chancellor of Duke Kunshan University and an expert in talent exchange and academic exchanges between US and China. And he will speak on those themes. So we will have a well-rounded discussion of the immediate issues on trade and technology, but also areas which we will be hearing about over the next couple of months and years during the Trump administration on AI, on S&T competition, on S&T policy, and areas where they can collaborate, cooperate, and even perhaps compete. So having said that, can I have Mr. ZHOU deliver his remarks?
Okay, thank you very much for having me again. I still remember last time I came here to show my PowerPoint about the trade data, about how the trade between China and the United States has changed. Actually, last evening I just arrived here, so it's a sleepless DC. And many people, when I talked with them that it's a sleepless evening, they will ask me, did you get some interview by the bilateral relation between China and the United States? I said, actually not. I was gotten many interviews last evening and last night, but many of the issues is about how China is trying to do better in the coming years about the higher quality development. How can we deal with the domestic market consumptions or et cetera, those questions. And I seldom opened, to watch TV, but this morning I watched the TV of NBC, and I found that most of these issues are to do with elections, some of this abortion issues or some of other issues. So I mean, the attitudes towards the domestic issues are quite different. China is trying to find out a better way for sustainable development and trying to give a better support, like for the free trade agreement 3.0 point between China and ASEAN. So as I found that the two panels are really interconnected. Because when I opened the TV, I found that they are talking about the full meetings, but they said that before the meetings of these two presidents, Donald Trump just declared that the United States is going to continue with the nuclear test. It's really a kind of impacts between the international relations and the trade. So I agree that the then USTR, like Heiser has mentioned, that no trade is free. Actually, in my understanding, no trade is free is not about the trade is not free. It's about how can we pay attention to the trade. Is that trade mechanism free to get, or the globalization is what we deserve to have? I don't think that is naturally happen. So after the conflicts between these two economies, we found that trade is not free because we have to pay more attention and trying to be careful about dealing with this. So based on this trade negotiation, and many people are worried about the relation between these two countries, I think that personally, I would say I will be a little bit more optimistic compared with most of the experts in the international relations. I'm not so worried about the impacts of many of these policies because market is more functional, more powerful compared with government interference and in any circumstances. We have to reach a new balance based on the market rules. We cannot even change that. So actually, that is my understanding about the trade. Although the trade between China and the United States has decreased about 1/3 this year compared with last year. That is a huge drop, compared with China's trade with the rest of our trading partners. Of the resting partners, we are in an increase rate. But the trade has to be continue. So based on that, I have to ask some questions. The first one is trade the causes or the reasons or the consequence? I know that everyone believes that trade is naturally happened. We have to, deal with the trade in a more easy way, like to guarantee the tariffs or reduce the restrictions on the trade. But I would say that trade is also deserved to be protected because people are depending on the expectation. If you are not able to provide the people hope, they will try to change their direction of the trade, like what we have seen as the soil being one of the very important agricultural products between China and the United States. I think that maybe the Treasury is glad because there are some good news for the export of soybeans to China, but it's not just our short-term impacts. I would say the people, especially the farmers in the United States, has gone to our large bankruptcy this year compared with last year, which is a very important impact on the possible supply globally as coming seasons. So I would say that if we are going to trying to deal with the situation, I would say that for China, I want to explain it because we wrote the white paper this spring and published that on China's position on the bilateral relations with the United States. And we put that, as our department, we finished this white paper and we have reiterated that the trade relations are based on the mutual, beneficiary and equal position. So as my personal understanding, the trade between China and the United States should be based not only from the bilateral levels. We want to do it as a multilateral levels. That is very, very strict principles. As I just got interviews, before this panels by the Global Times, they asked me what is China's, experiences and attitudes. I said that is always there. We want to respect the globalization, multilateral system, and we want everyone to respect them because we are beneficiary from that. And for the, this year, we actually invested a lot in China in different provinces about different sectors. From the traditional sectors, they are really impacted a lot by the additional tariffs. And this tariff has made people having a very tough choices, whether they still able to employ the people or whether they have to find alternative markets. So most of this, I have attended many conferences of them, these sectors, and most of them are trying to use the keyword of innovation instead of just trying to do better competition or trying to diversify their trade relations. So I think that is a basic idea, our philosophy of Chinese people. If we are not able to do something innovatively, we are not able to compete with our competitors. And for this panel, we discussing about the technology. Technology is important for China, and in my understanding, there are maybe 4 factors we have to take care when we are talking about the science-related industries. The first one is about the factor is about the development of the technology itself. Well, we know that based on the abilities of the most advanced technology, United States is still leading. And I think that is the truth. We are not just to say that China has overwhelmed or taking the place of United States. I don't think that will happen even in the short coming future. So that is the basics, basic for our traditional, for the bilateral trade relations. And the second, I think that is also important for the supporting factors and also the cost of getting those resources. As that, I would argue that maybe there were a little bit balanced position between China and the United States because we have cheaper electricities and we also have very important and sound supply chains. And that is kind of very important reasons why people choose to invest in certain countries and get a stronger abilities of the scale of its economy. Well, the third one is about applications or the markets. I think that is a little bit more different compared with the previous decades. In the coming 5 years, China has put its very different attitudes about our domestic market. We want to build our big and strong market, domestic market. I think that is really our different expression if you are looking at the suggestion of the CPC's fourth preliminaries this time. In my understanding, that means that we are not just trying to produce products. We are also going to consume more things, and we are importing more things from other countries. That is quite different. And I think that is also the reasons why we are getting more import from so many other countries. After I return, I will join the China's International Import Expo in Shanghai, which is kind of a national expo to import things from other countries. So these applications and also, Nvidia, when the CEO of them, he has illustrated that again, that the market is the next level of competition. I would say in this regard, China will have a very strong potentials in the future. And the fourth factor, I would say, that is the efficiency of innovation and also expectation. In this regard, I would say China's market is more stable and predictable, and that is very important for the investors to make decisions. So all of these kind of factors are just some of the things when we are trying to predict the future of the bilateral trade and the trade of China. And in this regard, I will also stop here because I hope that the trade between these two countries can be continued and sustainable, but that has to be decided by the attitudes and also the actions of US side, not only from China. Thank you.
Thanks, ZHOU. We're going to pull Paul up. We have asked Paul to speak, I think, on a very timely topic. Paul has great expertise into the AI and the chip sector in China, obviously in the US too. We know that China wants to buy certain chips. The US president wants to sell certain chips. The US also wants to embargo certain chips. China doesn't want to purchase certain chips from the US. So it's all very complicated. I think Paul is the best person to kind of guide us through what were the sort of bargains that were made at the discussion table last night in Busan, and just to talk a little bit about the AI chip ecosystem in China. Thanks.
Thank you for having me on. And the timing, as you noted, somebody noted earlier, is really good. As actually the meeting was this morning here, Beijing time. So let me just quickly, before I dive into the AI semiconductor piece, just note 3 numbers that are related to this and also related to Michael Swain's excellent comments related to Taiwan, because I think it's important to note, because all these AI semiconductors we're talking about are eventually manufactured and packaged on Taiwan, at least most of them. So let me just throw out three numbers: 500 billion, 5 trillion, and 15 trillion. So 500 billion is the number that Jensen Huang threw out this week of back orders for his firm's GPUs. Now that is a massive number. And it means that Taiwan's economy is tied even more closely to the AI economy, if you will, that's really driving the United States economy and the stock market. So that's a sort of mind-bending number if you put that in perspective. The other number is 5 trillion. And that is the market cap of NVIDIA. That's the third largest GDP, third largest country in the world. That market cap of 5 trillion. And that's also pretty mind-boggling. That's gone from 4 trillion to 5 trillion in, I think, 3 months. And then the last number, 15 trillion, that's the estimate by Rhodium last year of the impact of any kind of cutoff of Taiwan and TSMC, as Michael noted, from the global economy and all those fabs that are making these GPUs on Taiwan. So I think that's probably an underestimate, because that's just an estimate of sort of sales of certain kinds of equipment and broader markets. But of course, the hit to the stock market and to all that, the market cap and to many things would be much bigger than that, multiples of that. So as you noted, the currently AI semiconductors are sort of on the menu here. It's very interesting because during the Biden administration, of course, the Commerce Department, the U.S. government, and the Biden administration put controls on the most advanced GPUs, or graphics processing units, for export to China. And the parameters that governed exports to China were changed several times. And then, of course, NVIDIA, the company that's now with a $5 trillion market cap, figured out ways to design new GPUs that were just below those thresholds so they could export those legally to China. And they did that for the last 2 years of the Biden administration, including this H20 GPU, which has become such a target of a lot of attention. And many millions of those H20 GPUs were sold between, say, October of 2023 and the end of December up until April of 2025. But then the Trump administration decided in April of 2025 to issue letters to both NVIDIA and also other companies like AMD and Intel, which were making GPUs, to actually put in place a licensing regime and say, basically, we're gonna deny licenses for sale of these H20 GPUs to China. Now this was an interesting development, because those H20s, for example, had been bought in large numbers by Chinese companies like Alibaba and Tencent and ByteDance to use for AI inference, because they were again sort of downgraded, deprecated in performance, but they were still very useful for running AI applications in the cloud. And so those companies in China bought a lot of these. Then, as part of the trade negotiations that began in earnest in April, particularly the issues around rare earths and export controls, the issue of the H20s became tangled up in the trade talks. And at the same time, some of the new advisors to President Trump in Washington, particularly AI czar David Sachs, began making the argument that the U.S. should allow exports of some of these less advanced GPUs to China. And the rhetoric that was used around that was that the U.S. should keep China addicted to U.S. technology and, basically to inferior U.S. technology. Now, this was really something that angered officials in Beijing pretty quickly. And so the Chinese reacted by urging their companies with some kind of guidance. I don't think it was really a mandate to reconsider buying the H20 now that the U.S. had again said this is something that is approved. Now this happened because David Sachs and Jensen Huang from NVIDIA were able to convince Trump that this was a good idea by going into the Oval Office, and Trump said, "Of course. Why are we not selling these GPUs to China?" That was in the June timeframe. And so again, China basically decided that it didn't really want its companies to be buying these deprecated GPUs, and so NVIDIA decided to not manufacture more of these GPUs at TSMC in Taiwan because they couldn't guarantee that they could sell these GPUs, and there's no other place that would buy them except for companies in China because of other companies could just buy other more advanced GPUs from NVIDIA. And then at the same time, in the June-July timeframe, President Trump also hinted that he might be willing to allow a more advanced version of an NVIDIA GPU, which has come to be called the B30, which is based on NVIDIA's newer architecture, the Blackwell architecture, to be sold to China and be licensed for sales to China. But this was all also complicated, of course, by President Trump also saying, hey, we want to collect a 15% tax on the sales of these chips to China. So actually, NVIDIA has received licenses, for example, to sell the H20 GPUs to China, but the administration hasn't given NVIDIA clear guidance on how it plans to collect that 15% tax. So as of about a month and a half ago, NVIDIA had decided not to, or at least hadn't actually shipped any of the new chips to China. And I think also there was a sense of waiting to see that perhaps the B30, this new, more advanced chip, would get a better reception in China and they would be able to sell this. Now, this is a complicated calculus for NVIDIA because to sell this chip, they have to start up production again at TSMC in Taiwan. And this is a process that takes months to do. And so they need to have a guarantee that the administration, the Trump administration, will in fact approve licenses for export of these GPUs, and that the Chinese government will encourage or at least not impede Chinese companies' willingness to purchase large numbers of these. Because we're talking about the need to really make it worth NVIDIA's while to manufacture at least several millions of these chips at TSMC in Taiwan. So what happened yesterday was that the issue, there were a couple of rumors before the big meeting yesterday in South Korea that President Trump was going to raise this issue of the B30s. And it's interesting because I think Reuters got the story wrong. It said these were not raised. And President Trump just spoke, there's a video you can watch. He spoke on Air Force One going back, and he said initially that the Blackwell architecture, this new chip architecture, was not discussed with China. But then USTR Jamison Greer, who was standing right behind Trump, actually intervened and said, oh no, of course we discussed the Blackwells. And so it looks like that at least this issue was discussed. Now, it's a tricky issue because it really is an issue between China and NVIDIA. The U.S. position here, if Trump is sort of signaling that he would approve exports of this chip, is sort of, I think he called it a referee in this, because it really depends, as I noted, on whether the Chinese companies will be allowed or will want to buy these GPUs. Now, it's also interesting that there were rumors that if President Trump approved this, that a lot of people at the Commerce Department might resign, people who don't support the idea of selling these more advanced GPUs to China under any circumstances, right? And then also yesterday, there were any number of former Biden and Trump administration officials, like the former ambassador to China, Nick Burns, and former Deputy National Security Advisor Matt Pottinger, who made sort of bombastic quotes, if you will, about the implications of selling these B30 chips to China. Now, there's a lot of confusion around this because these are deprecated chips. They're much less capable than the most advanced chips that NVIDIA sells. But of course, as I noted earlier, they're still useful to China for some applications, and they would give China and Chinese companies the ability to continue developing advanced AI models and training, both in terms of training those models and using these chips for inference, for example. So they would bridge an important gap but getting back to your original question, Sourabh, the Chinese domestic manufacturers of AI semiconductors, particularly Huawei, which is the main player here, they're under a lot of pressure to provide domestic alternatives. But the problem is U.S. export controls on Chinese semiconductor manufacturing equipment, on exports of semiconductor manufacturer equipment to China are pretty stringent right now. And so companies like the equivalent of TSMC in China, which is a company called Semiconductor Manufacturing International, or SMIC, in Beijing and Shanghai is struggling to try to manufacture Huawei's most advanced designs, which they're being manufactured around the 7 nanometer level compared to the more advanced NVIDIA GPUs, of course, which are being manufactured at TSMC at 5 and 3 and below nanometers, some of the most advanced nodes. And so the ability of Huawei and SMIC to expand production to meet domestic demand and provide a real alternative to NVIDIA and AMD, which again are selling only sort of downgraded chips to China, is still in question. And there's the whole issue also of U.S. controls on things like high bandwidth memory, which is critical to be packaged with GPUs to make them really capable of being used to train advanced AI models. And so the Chinese domestic industry is really not capable yet. Maybe in a year and a half, or maybe next year, a year and a half, 18 months, 12 to 18 months, they're working on new capabilities that would come online that would allow them to provide a better alternative. So the B30s would be useful in the sense of providing a bridge that would allow Chinese companies to continue to develop the most advanced AI models. And that's another big issue, because over the last year, almost all of the open source or open weight models that are available now globally are coming from China, because Chinese companies like Alibaba and Tencent and ByteDance and Moonshot AI and ZHOU, they have all developed very capable open source models, which are now being increasingly used in applications. Last week, for example, Airbnb, a US company, announced that it was using one of Alibaba's models, open source models, for its customer service application, its customer service platform. So China, even though the US controls have been in place now for 3 years on both GPUs and semiconductor manufacturing equipment, that hasn't really prevented Chinese companies from being able to develop very capable AI models, and particularly, again, open source models. So we're at sort of an interesting juncture where if the president decides to allow the export of these less capable but still useful GPUs to China, that will be important for China. But I think the comments from some of the former Biden Trump administration officials that this would be some kind of surrender to China, or giving up U.S. export controls, or giving China some sort of a major advantage in AI are not accurate, and really don't stand up to serious scrutiny, because again, these are not the most advanced chips, and would only provide a sort of temporary bridge so that China's domestic industry can sort of catch up. But that's a very complicated process, and Chinese companies are devoting a lot of resources to basically recreating large portions. The chips issue obviously has been caught up in the trade negotiations, and we'll see going forward what comes out of any written document and what the decision is by the Chinese government, for example, to welcome the NVIDIA offer of this B30 GPU. NVIDIA has a long history in China of collaboration with Chinese companies, and prior to the U.S. export controls, NVIDIA had 95% of the data center GPU market in China, and Jensen Huang said last week that their market share has gone to 0. So that's the other factor here, is that NVIDIA has taken a huge hit despite the increase in the stock price and its $5 trillion valuation, has taken a huge hit in terms of its sales to China. If it was able to sell fully into the China market, for example, I mean, the stock would probably be double, because China is one of the major countries, of course, developing AI models and developing AI infrastructure. And so without the export controls, Chinese companies would be buying, millions, tens of millions of NVIDIA GPUs here. So it's a very interesting problem here, and we can talk more about sort of the AI race between China and the US. But right now, it looks like the president probably has more or less green-lighted the ability to sell these chips, but it's not clear that the Chinese government, what their position is, and how they will sort of signal their companies about whether it's okay to consider buying some of these new US chips. And NVIDIA is not going to commit to building those on Taiwan at TSMC until they're sure that they have a market in China. So anyway, very interesting time and I'm very happy to be here and talk further about these issues.
Thanks, Paul. Fascinating, and thanks for bringing us up to speed on the chip front. As Paul mentioned a little bit about, the administration came in with a little different philosophy of kind of hooking China to US chips, et cetera, Someone who's had a front row view of this whole policymaking process is Kay. Kay is going to talk to us a little bit about AI philosophies of this administration, past administration, and other issues.
All right.
Thanks, Kay.
Thank you. So I get to talk to this group. I'm very happy about that. During the 12 years of the Obama and Biden administrations, I was actually not allowed to talk to any Chinese government officials, nor even to be photographed with them. So this is an interesting change because of the Wolf Amendment, which still applies to my former office and to NASA. So instead of trying to talk about what's happened in the last 24 hours, I want to talk a little bit about the framework for how the US government has dealt with AI as an emerging technology. And I'll get into a little bit semiconductors, because of course, when we talk about AI, we need to also talk about semiconductor chips. So let me structure my talk in 3 parts. First, let me talk about the enduring US federal government role in AI. AI is, yes, it's hardware and software. It is a set of technologies. It involves, of course, models. It involves research. It involves compute. It involves data, both the data that AI uses in its models, but also training data. So most of the basic discoveries and technologies underpinning what we know today as AI came from US federal investments in research and development dating back decades to the 50s and the 60s, performed at national laboratories, universities, federal laboratories, and companies. So in the Obama administration, which feels like so long ago when we talk about AI, there were a series of White House reports co-authored by my former office that grappled with the appropriate federal government role in AI. Although there were and continue to be debates about what that proper federal role is, there is no debate that the federal government needs to keep investing in AI research, especially fundamental research that is not in the interest of private companies to support, and also AI research and development for public applications, non-market applications, and that, of course, includes defense applications. So my office issued the first ever federal AI strategic plan for R&D to unify and coordinate, at that time, billions of dollars in annual federal investments in AI research and development. On a bipartisan basis, and in the first Trump administration, the National AI Initiative Act became law at the end of 2020. It established a National AI Initiative, a National AI Initiative Office at OSTP, and a number of other policies to sustain that federal research role in AI. And I was happy to continue that Trump administration started initiative in the Biden White House, and it continues in the second Trump administration. So there is continuity. Now, second pillar, I want to talk about the Biden administration approach to governance and diffusion of AI. It started with the premise that regulation was both politically impossible and probably unwise, given the rapidly changing and emergent nature of the technology. That said, entities like the European Union did go ahead with a regulatory approach in the EU AI Act. But instead, the Biden administration focused on a couple of pillars of governance on AI. But beneath the pillars was foundational, a blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. What is the blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights? It is a set of rights that the American people can come to expect from the use of AI technologies. And that is, of course, and they are the principles of trustworthiness, of responsible use, of personal privacy, and to the degree possible, explainability of AI when it's used to make consequential decisions. Because after all, for most of these models, it is our data, data about us, data that we create, that are the foundation for AI models. Now, on that foundation, the US government built a three-pronged approach to governance. First, there is some regulation in that the Biden administration issued regulation of government uses of AI, including government procurement of AI-enabled technologies, because of course, that is a legitimate area for the federal government to regulate. Second pillar was to collect voluntary commitments from leading AI companies, including, of course, NVIDIA, which we just heard about. And third was globally coordinated actions for this global technology. And we did that opportunistically in various fora, including a United Kingdom AI Safety Summit, an OECD Global Partnership for AI, the G7 Hiroshima process. Most of those were centered around democratic values by democratic countries. And of course, you recognize that that grouping excludes the People's Republic of China. And at the same time, as a side of that, on those three pillars of regulation of government use, voluntary commitments from US AI companies, and globally coordinated actions, we, to the side, had a semiconductor policy. Most of you know about this, the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022, one of my proudest accomplishments during the Biden White House. And that, of course, instituted a policy of trying to encourage the domestic production of advanced semiconductor chips in places like Ohio, Arizona, Texas, so on. So, of course, that was the hardware component of AI. Now, and we also worked to, on the side, make sure that we built a public infrastructure for AI research and development. It's exemplified in what we call the National AI Research Resource, or the NARE. That was intended to be a public research infrastructure of compute and data that could be used by people all across America to do AI research. Basically, the philosophy was, AI research is too important to be left just to trillion-dollar companies. That, we all deserve access to our AI research resources. But now we are in a different administration, so the third phase. What happened? Well, in this current administration, the fundamental federal role in investing in AI research and development remains. That remains, although it has been turned kind of decisively toward national security and other applications, rather than more civilian applications. Another foundation, the Bill of Rights that we articulated, that's gone. It is no longer discussed. The government regulation of AI, those memos and executive orders have been repealed. The status of voluntary commitments is unclear. So the frame is very different now. And now there is a new AI action plan that the Trump administration issued earlier this year. If I could summarize in one sentence, it is about the United States winning the race for global dominance in AI. And by US, we mean US companies. So dominance by US industry in a global AI technology competition is now the goal of US federal government policy. And the pillars that I've described before are similar, but they've been turned around. As I said, one pillar about federal investments in R&D is turned decisively toward military applications. AI infrastructure, which I discussed briefly through the NARE, is a second pillar, but that is now focused on data centers and other private infrastructure rather than public. We've probably heard, we've all heard that the United States is committed to, deregulating and simplifying the permitting process and clearing away obstacles for companies to build AI data centers here in the United States. And that is an evolution that may be appropriate given this stage of AI's evolution, when data centers have become real sources of economic output. But at the same time, we are also at a stage when we are ready to talk about AI education and AI workforce development. And this administration has signaled that in addition to the traditional physical infrastructure of AI, the data centers, we are also ready to talk about education and workforce development. I will point out that some of their electric power policies, such as trying to eliminate wind and solar power, go against their stated desire to have plentiful power and water for AI data centers in the United States. But in any administration, of course, there are some goals that might conflict if they are not deconflicted. And that third pillar that I talked about global action, the third pillar of the Trump administration remains global, but the focus has shifted to ensuring that global dominance that I talked about. The shift has already been underway in terms of clearing away obstacles for US AI companies to dominate in global marketplaces. The Biden administration, as already discussed, had an AI diffusion rule of export controls on AI chips and models. Those export controls have been back and forth over the past year, but I think my summary of it, they have been loosened, if not eliminated. We'll see what happens as a result of this week's announcements. So that is where we are. And the way I see it, of course, trade is an important other component of this discussion. And of course, we've started to talk about the trade implications. The goal of ensuring US AI companies' dominance in AI industries may or may not conflict with the desire to, of course, have a secure United States against Chinese interests. And that balance of trying to balance our desire for US exports with containing, in some sense, China, those are the decisions that are being made in real time right now, this week and in weeks to come. But I hope this talk results in some kind of mental framework for understanding some of the AI-related debates that will be coming forward. And I look forward to the discussion when we can talk more about how this framework might apply in situations that are happening now and to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay. That was really illuminating how the framework has evolved. It really helpful from to understand the whole perspective. Dennis is going to be our closing speaker. He has a PowerPoint, so just bear till we get the PowerPoint up. I just wanted to introduce Denis a little more. Denis has been a distinguished fellow at ICAS. He has been a very, very thoughtful and regular contributor to ICAS's work, particularly in our trade and tech program. And Denis obviously has great experience with China, living in China, and particularly in areas of academic exchanges, talent networks. He's been a dean out there. And I think Denis is in a great position to talk to us on many of the larger, broader science and tech issues which relate to the two countries. And he was, in fact, very much instrumental in, or very much involved in much of, in kind of the analysis and of the US-China Science and Technology Agreement, which the two sides did actually arrive at and renew or extend during the latter stages of the Biden administration. So, Denis, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for the nice words. I really appreciate it. I'm going to try to give you a kind of a broad overview of a number of facets of the bilateral S&T relationship, but I think I want to nest it in the larger perspective of where China's global footprint is evolving, particularly in terms of science and technology. And as you can see, China is no longer just a rising star. In some ways, China has risen. It already has risen, and I think there's some very interesting data. Why I chose to do a PowerPoint was because I think you need to see some of this data to really identify where China has come. So there's no Bluetooth, so I'm doing mine by my computer, and I'm going next slide. So this is just to give you an indication. Not only is China on the rise because of it's a source of R&D talent, but it's also an important source of demand for new technology. And you heard about its desire to get the latest and best NVIDIA chips, and it goes across the board. But China is also now a new source of innovation. If you talk to Western pharmaceutical companies, they are now licensing Chinese compounds and Chinese formulas for the newest drugs that are going to be developed in the West. And so this is also part of a change in Chinese posture. And it all leads to a very reconfiguration of China's global footprint, which means that China now is utilizing science and technology as a tool of diplomacy to have more influence and assert a larger role in world affairs. Next slide. So under Xi Jinping, you know there have been a number of major global initiatives. And I think that we need to kind of look at these in a more holistic kind of way, where China is expanding its global footprint. And right at the center is China's latest global governance initiative for AI. And at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting this year, also in September, when he talked about global governance, he talked about China leading a major initiative in the sense upping the stakes for the United States and helping to form a regime to manage AI. And of course, the big support that they're getting from this is from the Global South, the BRICS countries, the BRI countries. This is all part of a new evolving posture for China in international science and technology affairs. So we just came from the fourth plenum, and you heard from Minister ZHOU this morning about what he saw coming out of this. It's very interesting. I read that same document, and of course I was looking for some different things, but several things struck me about the Chinese comment, I think, that are important. First of all is the comment that China faces a profound and complex changes and rising uncertainty in the international environment. And this means that China must pay greater attention to self-strengthening and to self-reliance and to getting control of these so-called new productive forces that are going to drive the fourth industrial revolution or the fourth technological revolution. And so by 2035, China basically says that it wants to have a markedly stronger influence in terms of global science and technology affairs and utilize that across the globe. And that means that China will shift now from where it is now currently in terms of its import dependence in certain facets of the global supply chain to, quote unquote, elevating the whole of chain substitution and homegrown platforms. So you see a very important change going on in how China is going to interface with the rest of the world. And that includes, of course, things like scaling up AI and robotics as well as advanced materials. It means more emphasis on digital China, building up China's digital infrastructure, which again ties us back to what Paul was talking about NVIDIA chips. And you see a more activist posture in terms of standards diplomacy and participation in any kind of AI governance forum, which the Chinese consider to be very critical. Next slide. So Xi Jinping, despite all of the stuff going on, the restrictions, the choke point technologies and all of that, Xi Jinping has continued to be an advocate of openness for China. Mankind needs international cooperation. China is ready to join hands with other countries to promote science and technology innovation and make science and technology serve all peoples. And this is not something that's new. Going back to even 2021, he wrote a paper from a speech in which he says, "Science has no borders, but scientists have a motherland." Very, very important comment. And in it, he says, "We must implement a more open and inclusive, mutually beneficial, shared international science and technology cooperation strategy." And that's very simple what's driving this. China has been the largest beneficiary of globalization. When China opened the door in 1978, it has clearly benefited from its access to Western know-how and Western technology, not because it's done anything in a conspiratorial way, because it understood that it had to be an absorptive role. It had an absorptive posture. Now China basically has shifted, and it shifted from becoming a net importer now to being a supplier of know-how. Now, all of this is being driven by the fact that the Chinese have continued to invest heavily in domestic R&D. The growth of R&D has been substantial, growing faster in most cases over the last 10 years than the growth of GDP. You can see the slope of the black line here. That's China. The purple line is the United States. And China clearly is on a march to surpass the United States sometime in 2030 if the present trends were to continue. And this continues onward. Can you go to the next slide, please? This is China's share of global R&D spending. You can see from 2000, where it was only about 5% of global R&D spending, now it's reached almost 25% of global R&D spending. And you can see the decline in Japan, the EU, and the United States as a relative share of global spending. Now, money doesn't buy innovation, and you can throw a lot of money down the toilet. But the thing about what's happening in China is that starting in about 2012, we can track the improvements in the operation of the Chinese R&D system, and which we can tell increased productivity and improved performance. And so we don't get to where we are today by some accident. We get there because the Chinese have been fairly steadfast in committing to improving their situation. Now, this is also true in terms of their, again, S&T footprint. China now has partnerships in science and technology with over 160 countries. It has executed over 119 agreements. The United States, by the way, we have only about 60 agreements with other countries in the world. It's joined over 200 international, intergovernmental institutions in which the Chinese actually now have the #1 or the #2 position in many of those organizations. And it's, again, its footprint has been extensive, including its operation in the Belt and Road countries. And this is part of how you get to where we are. These are all facets of China's access into the global science and technology system, and how it has built up these links for its own strategic purposes to modernize. Why? Why is this all happening? Because the Chinese recognized that the Achilles heel of their global stature was their weakness in science and technology. You may remember that Henry Kissinger, when he was Secretary of State, said in the early 70s that one of the reasons why the US has global influence is because of its strengths in science and technology. The Chinese took to heart that message, and they realized starting in '78 that one of the things they had to do was close the gap between itself and the West. So if you look at what's happened in China now, you see two tracks. One, deeper international cooperation, moving from the central government all the way down to the local governments and the enterprises and their scientific associations. But at the same time, with the establishment of the Central S&T Commission, working together with the Foreign Affairs Leading Group, China now has become more activist in terms of utilizing science and technology as a tool of its own diplomacy. So I don't have time to go into all of this, but suffice to say, let's go down to that third bullet. Can you go one more slide, please? Yep, to the third bullet here. And that is that in the period 2008 to 2010, the share of top 1% cited scientific publications was 49% for the United States, 10% for China. Several years later, during the 2018 to 2020 period, the US share declined to 37%. The Chinese share rose up to 31%. And so we can see that the Chinese share of world scientific productivity at the highest levels. So these are not like producing lots of patents and you have lots of junk patents, or you're just increasing the numbers of articles. The data all indicates steady improvement in the Chinese positioning from a qualitative point of view not just a quantitative point of view. And I think 2 days ago, the National Academy of Science journal Proceedings came out with a publication in which it said that in these joint collaborations between the US and China, it is increasingly the case in over 50% that the Chinese PIs, the principal investigators, are increasingly the team leaders in these projects and the main drivers behind these articles. Next slide. So you can see this is data. Caroline Wagner and I have been working on a paper about how do we operationalize the STA. And China is no longer, as I said, emerging rise of China. China has risen. This is the total research output measured through Scopus journals between China and the United States in 2024. You can see China has passed the United States, but even more important on the right side, we see that in terms of elite publications from Nature, China has significantly passed the United States. So China now is the leading producer of top-tier scientific articles in the world. And you can see this in this next slide, please, that China's definitely become, a rock star in terms of its position in terms of scientific production and publication. Next one, please. Again, these are just all data showing this is SCI, the citation indexes, where Chinese papers are increasingly cited. And this is next slide. Some more of the same kind of thing, ranking, China ranking #1 in SCI, #1 in EI, and #2 and #1 in CPCI. So these are all this data for most. The interesting thing now, and this is why the concern might exist, that in addition to increasing the number of high-quality publications the Chinese have, they are becoming more domestically oriented. More and more Chinese articles are being published in Chinese domestic journals and not are making their way outside. In order to strengthen the quality and the caliber of domestic scientific publications, there's more of a premium being placed on publishing inside of China, whereas before the premium was based on publishing outside of China. China has one of the most highest collaboration rates domestically of any country in the world. So interesting procedure. So I don't have time again. Can we go to the next slide? Next slide, please. I just want to give these are sort of examples of China's science and technology diplomacy. These are what we call big global science projects where China is participating, and it is now going to build its own 20 major big science projects in order to invite Western collaboration from abroad. Next slide. So where do things stand in the U.S.-China relationship? Next slide. We know that agreement that was recently renewed was first signed in 1979. A lot of things have changed over that 40-plus year period. But the hope is that over time, while the renewed agreement sits on the Trump desk sort of dormant and languishing, the hope is that out of this big deal that he's talking about, or out of an improved relationship, could be the idea for renewing activity under the Science and Technology Agreement. That science and technology cooperation, as it did for the first 30 years, could once again become a stabilizing factor, like it sort of did at times during the Cold War with the US-Soviet Union relationship. And we're talking about a concept called smart openness. Next slide, please. So what is smart openness? We think that within the language that's being used within the new STA, which includes a lot of language about guardrails, protections, and protecting personal and data security, we could create, in effect, a three-tier system, red light, green light, amber light, in which we could open up new areas under the green light system that are acceptable risk in terms of national security. We could clearly identify what we don't want to do in terms of red light, and then we could negotiate specific things under the amber light system. But the language in the new STA is sufficient enough to let people sleep at night and go ahead with renewed collaboration. And why wouldn't you want to go ahead with renewed collaboration? China now, as I said, is no longer the rising star. It's risen. It's there. You want to have access. Lack of access to the Chinese system means technological surprise. The DeepSeek case is a good example in which no one was really prepared for what was going to happen in China. We need sustained access to see where China's emerging pockets of excellence are. Next slide, please. So that moves us on to science and technology exchanges and, education exchanges. And again, over 5.5 million Chinese students have studied in the United States since 1980. That number is huge. If you remember the social engineering that is attached to international education, it is that by having students come to the United States, we can win over their hearts and minds, they can become pro-American, and hopefully help to advance things that are of our interest in when they go back home to their own country. That hasn't happened in the way that we had thought it would be, but we can't forget there is a vanguard in China that is favorably inclined towards the United States. And it's very important that we continue to have Chinese students and scholars come. The National Academy of Sciences in 2023 did a major study about the global talent pipeline for the United States and said that the China connection is one of the most important aspects of the United States being able to sustain its needs for high-end talent, particularly, obviously, of course, in STEM fields. And the other thing, of course, when I was the executive vice chancellor of Duke Quinshon University, I'm always asked, why did you take the job? And it's very simple. Young people from China and the United States living and working together in the same environment could learn how to understand each other, build greater sensitivity to one another, and when they meet 20 years later in a negotiation or some kind of policy discussion, they can have some sense of who each other is and maybe even, in fact, avoid the conflicts that we're facing today. Next slide. So just to kind of just get to the end, right now we have two very interesting situations. We have the US H-1B situation, where now the Trump administration has asked for a $100,000 fee for people who want to come to the United States and basically end up getting an H-1B. Now, this is not an anti-China policy. In 2023, 71% of the H-1B applicants were from India and 12% were from China. So it's not particularly directed towards the Chinese, but because China provides much of the high-end H-1B segment of that group, it is important and it has consequence. China, on the other hand, has just issued the K visa. The K visa is designed to bring more talent into China. In fact, the K visa opens up the door to lots of foreign young talent, and they don't even need to have a job offer to come to China. You just need to have an idea that you might want to start a business. The only problem is that, of course, China is experiencing a big problem in employment for their college graduates, and many people complained, why are you willing to open up opportunities for foreigners when we don't even have jobs ourselves? And the number ranges depending where the Chinese data is, but 14 to 21% of graduates can't find a job 6 months. So the key is how do we reconfigure the puzzle of science and technology and education and put it together? We've heard some rumors that President Trump said as part of this big deal, the Chinese buy 500 Boeing airplanes and we'll take 600,000 Chinese students. And maybe it's apocryphal. We don't really know what goes on in those discussions, but it's enough of a rumor that I mentioned it. So where do we end up? In 1978, China was on the margins of the international science and technology system. It had limited participation. It was engaged at that time from coming out of the Cultural Revolution of this Zoli-Gongsheng self-reliance kind of policy, and it was outside more or less the Western system of science and technology. In 2025, where are we? China is a very proactive stakeholder in that system, and in fact, it wants to influence that system. It's an attractive site for R&D, a major source of innovation and new discovery, and it's becoming a big transnational collaborator, even as domestic collaboration increases, and it wants to play a role in global governance. So it's gone from a marginally involved peripheral player to much more of a globally integrated science and technology leader. And eventually, basically, China wants to achieve 3 goals. Next, yeah, this is my last slide. So can China achieve all the 3 goals? Become an innovative nation driven by creativity, in which even under the prevailing political system, creativity is allowed to prosper. Second, harmonious society, to borrow the Heshi Shehui from Hu Jintao. Xi Jinping wants stability, and he wants, of course, the dominance of the Chinese Communist Party. And China as a cross-border collaborative economy in which it maintains openness, but at the same time increases its level of self-reliance. And the question is, in the current geopolitical security environment, how does that impact on China's ability to achieve all those goals? So China is faced with lots of dilemmas, but I think out of this 4th plenum, we see China's roadmap for the next 5 to 10 years. And I thought it was very important that Minister Chu today attached the 15th five-year plan to the 14th five-year plan, which then I would even attach back to the 13th five-year plan. There's lots of continuity in what the Chinese want to do, and even as the world environment becomes more difficult, China has become more steadfast in identifying its necessary direction and what it wants to do. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Let's go directly to questions. Please keep the questions short and succinct. Introduce yourself and direct it to one or more of the panelists. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Matthew Rivera. I'm a student at American University. My question is for Mr. Simon. You brought up how China, their scientific progress is going through a boom, but what I also noticed is that the United States scientific progress with the amount of papers that are being released is actually going down. May you please explain why the United States is seeing a stagnation in scientific progress compared to China? Thank you.
Well, I'm going to say that the United States is not showing yet a decline in scientific progress. What you are seeing, those are shares in relative to the entire world. Of course, the Chinese share of patents, publications, and scientists and engineers is growing. But you also saw in one of Denis's many slides that, for example, US R&D investments continue to increase. The R&D GDP ratio we just show, for the first time, the United States is above 3% of our GDP. And that is still in excess of what China does. So I will say that, by most indicators, the United States is still a leader, if not the leader, in science and engineering. But it's undoubtedly true that China has grown and has risen and is either a peer competitor or slightly ahead or slightly behind in most science and engineering disciplines.
Hello? So I agree. It's, when we put in place things like the CHIPS and Science Act and other kinds of things, that's designed to help us. But I also look at the policy over the last 18 months in the United States where research funding has been cut, where monies given for overhead have gone from 55% to 15% for universities. 8 months, excuse me, 8 months, okay. So things have gone downhill really fast. I mean, I know my university where I'm at Duke University, has gone into a stringent budgetary situation because of the withholding of federal funds from NIH and other federal agencies. And this is replicated across the board in the United States. So damage is being done. Our visa policies are not making it easy for talent and students to come into the United States. International education, which has been one of the strong points, over 1 million students coming to the United States. Now it's many students are not even trying to come to the US because they're afraid they won't get a visa, or they leave to go home for Christmas or Chinese New Year and they can't come back in the country. All of these things are affecting the attitude towards the United States as once a welcoming country. Now they're looking to Australia, UK, New Zealand, and other countries around the world.
Michael, I'll come to you. You'll be the last question, but why don't you go ahead, please?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Qingguo. I work with World Bank on the private sector IFC for the investment. So I have a question about this. Yeah, I know we're talking about technology and science, but I want to ask the downstream question, the manufacturing. China is also leading on the manufacturing side, and the average US citizen believes Chinese is taking away the jobs. So what if, like, say, a Chinese company try to build a billion-dollar company, or manufacturing company here in the US, see, even on the EV or the battery side, will that company be welcome here in the US, given this geopolitics tension? Or if that's not possible, if Chinese company can promote this manufacturing, given Trump wants to get manufacturing back to US?
Kay, can I ask you to take this question? Because, you know, as a Biden administration, where did it stand with regard to this sort of investment in kind of critical technologies or sensitive ones?
I think the short answer is I don't know in this current administration what would happen, because you do have, you know, conflicting signals coming. Politically, of course, states do welcome foreign direct investment in manufacturing plants. But at the same time, many states are very concerned if that foreign direct investment is coming from a Chinese company. So I don't know how that is going to work out. And, well, frankly, you know, in the Biden administration, it didn't really matter so much who the owner was. What mattered was, were US workers going to get jobs building semiconductor chips, building solar panels, or whatever? I don't know whether that attitude is still going to prevail in this political environment.
Yeah, let me just give a great answer. Let me just give a quick two-finger. The recent example of Gotion, which is a leading Chinese battery company, finally pulled out of Michigan because of a hostile environment in Michigan. I think it created in part by outside agitators. But Governor Pritzker of Illinois has said he would welcome Gotion in Illinois. So I agree that it really comes down to a state level kind of a decision. We've advised companies, for example, we had a client, a Japanese company that wanted to build a facility in the US, but they needed a Chinese partner in this. And so we did a risk assessment for them that got down basically to the state level, you know, which states are more likely to welcome this. Because again, for things like EVs and batteries, welcoming Chinese investment in those areas is going to be critical if the US is going to have a supply chain for batteries and EVs.
Michael, can I come to you? Last question.
Yeah, I just was going to ask it from a lay perspective, because Denis started off with a couple of slides that really stressed the Chinese desire to establish an independent or nearly autarkic, I guess, innovative ecosystem. And if that indeed is their goal, what does that mean for their collaboration initiatives? I mean, presumably you could have some, you know, welcoming of collaboration, interaction, but the Chinese would want to protect their ability to sustain that independence and autarkic position. How do they balance between those two objectives?
Well, actually, that was my last slide. If you recall, you know, how do they accomplish all three? Because the international security environment, frankly, is driving them to push the self-reliance positioning probably much stronger than they might have. It's always been lurking there that dependence on other countries going back to the Soviet Union days is not something they want to repeat. And they've always chagrined at the idea that the US or any other country can have leverage over it by virtue of withholding technology. So this all came to fruition during Trump 1.0, and it has continued through Biden, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that has made it more urgent and more desirable. But the reason why I talked about Xi Jinping's attitude is that he has not once in any speech, least external that we can see, talked about closing the door or narrowing the door or shutting the window a little bit more, or whatever euphemism you want to use. That has not been part of his shtick, you know, his logic. He said we got to maintain openness and we got to walk this road of greater self-reliance. So I think the term balancing act or finding an equilibrium point, that's what the Chinese are going to have to do, and we're going to have to figure that same thing out. How much engagement do we want globally while we're doing, you know, America first or whatever you want to call it? we're going to also have to figure that same thing out, because the key to our success, and Kay knows this better than anyone, has been our openness to the rest of the world, our ability to share knowledge, to exchange knowledge, etc. If we all of a sudden backtrack on this, we're moving away from the core strength that made us who we are, going back to our history, particularly post-war history.
Thanks, Dennis. Folks, we need to wrap it up at this point. Paul, I just want to say a great thank you to you. I know it's really late at night, and you might have an early morning. Thank you very much, and thanks to all the panelists.